The sign nailed to the old cottonwood screamed a silent curse, "White man don't forgive." And beneath it, still breathing, she hung. Under the merciless New Mexico sun, Josiah Wyatt rode with a slow, steady rhythm. Dust lifted with every step of his roan mare, settling on the cracked earth where the tracks of a lost heifer he'd been trailing for half a day had all but vanished. The silence out here in these scorched badlands was sacred. It was broken only by the faint creak of leather, the mournful whine of the wind, and the occasional call of a distant hawk soaring in the endless blue. Josiah liked his life this way, solitary, quiet, predictable. But then, he heard it. The sound was so faint it could have been the wind, a breath that seemed to have forgotten how to exhale. He froze in his saddle, tilting his head, his heart, accustomed to a steady beat, slowing its pace. The sound came again, a quiet, broken gasp, as thin and sharp as a thread about to snap. He dismounted, hastily tying the reins to a dead limb. With his rifle slung over his back, he moved through the thorny juniper and boulders until he came upon a clearing ringed by old cottonwoods. And there, under the oldest of them, he saw her. She was hanging by her wrists, her arms stretched above her head, her body limp like a broken doll, her feet barely touching the ground. Her skin, naturally dark, was covered in a layer of dust and dried blood. Her long black hair was matted with sweat. Her chest rose in shallow, erratic breaths, but she was alive. Josiah's gaze shot upward to the crude wooden sign nailed to the tree trunk just above her head. The words were scrawled in thick red paint, angry and jagged. "White man don't forgive." He involuntarily stepped back, bile rising in his throat. The air around him thickened, turning into a silent warning, a curse left to hang in the quiet. He glanced around, scanning the rocky ridges and piles of stone. No movement, no sound, just the wind rustling through dry leaves like a sinister whisper. His hand instinctively went to the knife on his belt. "Lord, what in God's name did they do to you?" The girl stirred faintly, her head lolling forward, and he saw the raw abrasions where the rope bit into her wrists. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." His boots crunched on the gravel as he stepped closer. He could see her face now. Young, maybe 18, with a high brow and a strong jaw. Her cheeks were hollow from thirst, and there was dried blood on her lip. He reached up and touched the rope, coarse, agave fiber, old and stiff. Whoever tied these knots wanted her to suffer, not just die. He pulled out his knife, but his fingers trembled. That sign screamed at him, echoing words he'd never said and deeds he'd never done. And yet it made him feel guilty. It made him hesitate. But the girl moaned again, and that faint sound broke his resolve. "I ain't them," he whispered, and the blade slid across the tight rope. With one sharp motion, he cut the bonds. She collapsed forward, and he barely caught her in time. Her body was hot, almost burning, and so light in his arms, as if she had no bones left. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, dark, terrified, unfocused. Josiah gently lowered her to the ground, kneeling in the dust. He soaked a cloth with water from his canteen and dabbed her cracked lips. "Easy now, you're safe. For the moment, at least." She blinked once, then again. Still no words, but her hand weakly clutched his sleeve. He cast one last look at the sign, then at her, took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "You got a name?" he asked softly. Silence. "Well then, we'll have to find one for you," he murmured. "But for now, you're with me." With those words, Josiah Wyatt stepped back into the wilderness, carrying a girl marked for death and a secret heavy enough to hang a man. The sun was already setting when Josiah reached his ranch. a modest patch of land clinging to the edge of a desert too stubborn to forget violence. A lone windmill creaked at the edge of the fence line, and the old barn sagged as if mourning something lost. The house itself, one room and a loft, with a roof patched with old sheets of tin, stood firm and honest, like the man who built it. Josiah carefully lifted the girl from the saddle and carried her inside. She was shivering with fever, her head pressed against his chest, her breath like the rustle of dry leaves on a stone floor. He laid her on the cot and gently removed the jacket, trying not to startle her. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, dark, wide, and distant, but they watched him. The flame of the kerosene lamp cast trembling shadows on the walls as he poured water into a metal basin. He took a clean cloth from a shelf and knelt. Her legs were bruised and scraped, one ankle swollen. The rope burns on her wrists looked like brands. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, more to break the silence than to expect a reply. "Just cleaning you up a bit." He dipped the cloth in the warm water, wrung it out, and slowly, almost reverently, took her right foot and placed it in the basin. She flinched ever so slightly. He paused, waiting. When she didn't pull away, he began to wash the dust and blood from her skin. His movements were gentle and precise, as if he were touching something sacred. The water turned a reddish brown. He worked in silence, trying not to meet her gaze for too long, though he felt it on him like a blade half drawn from its sheath, hesitating whether to strike or fall. Her lips parted once, as if to speak, but no sound came out. "Reckon you're not much for talking," he muttered, not unkindly. "That's all right. Silence is better than most things, most days." He finished with one foot, then the other. She let him. When he was done, he wrapped them in soft strips of cloth and gently placed them on a folded blanket. "You remind me of a willow by the river I used to camp near," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Flexible, quiet, but nothing could break it." He looked at her again, studying her features in the lamplight. Cheekbones as sharp as mountain ridges, lips cracked but full, dark eyelashes, thick with sand. She was young, too young for this kind of suffering, but behind her eyes was something ancient, something that didn't flinch from pain, only waited for it to pass. "I'll call you Willow," he said softly, "just for now. Quiet, but strong." She blinked once, slowly. No protest, no nod, just breath, just life. Josiah stood, wiped his wet hands, and reached for a blanket to cover her. He tucked it around her shoulders, then stepped back. "If you're hungry, there's beans. Not much, but better than nothing." Still no answer. He grabbed his bedroll and dragged it toward the door. He would sleep in the barn tonight, give her some space. It wasn't right for her to be watched by a stranger, especially one with blood in his past and questions in his eyes. Before he stepped outside, he looked back one last time. She had shifted slightly. Her eyes were closed, her lips no longer trembling. The basin still sat beside the cot, the water stained with the color of what had been done to her. He picked it up and emptied it outside, watching the water soak into the thirsty ground. And inside, in her dreams, she saw fire, horses, ropes cutting through the sky, and hands, rough but gentle, washing away the pain without asking for anything in return. The following days passed with the slow rhythm of desert life, but the silence inside the house was different now, thicker, charged with something just out of reach. Willow, as Josiah still called her, ate when he brought food, though never much. She moved with caution, her eyes always alert, her posture tense, like an animal that had been caged for too long. She never spoke, but he would catch her watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. At night, Josiah left her the cot and took to the barn, his rifle beside him. He pretended it was to give her space, but the truth was more complicated. He was afraid, not of her, but of what her presence meant. That sign on the tree still burned in his mind. White man don't forgive. Whoever wrote it wanted her to die slowly, and whoever they were, they might still be coming. It was 3 mornings later when he first saw the boot print, slightly smaller than his own, newer, angled toward the barn. Josiah squatted beside it on the hard-packed dirt and studied the heel. Military issue. Cavalry. The print was fresh, no more than a few hours old. He rose slowly, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. Nothing but sagebrush and shimmering heat. Back inside, he found Willow by the window, still and silent. She didn't look at him when he entered, but her body tensed. "Did you see anyone?" he asked. She said nothing, only pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I think we have company," Josiah murmured, more to himself than to her. That evening he kept the lamp turned low and stayed on the porch, his rifle across his knees. The wind had died down, coyotes howled far off, and the stars blinked into view like waking ghosts. Willow didn't sleep. He could hear her moving inside, pacing the floor in slow circles. The rider appeared around noon the next day. Dust curled behind the chestnut horse as it approached. The man on top wore the blue and gold of the U.S. Cavalry. His rifle was holstered, his hat pulled low, his jaw rough with stubble. Josiah stepped down from the porch, one hand resting casually on his belt. The soldier reined in his horse and squinted down at him. "You Wyatt?" "Depends who's asking." "Lieutenant Graham, Dust Hollow Station. We're tracking a fugitive." The man pulled a folded notice from his breast pocket and handed it down. "Seen this one?" Josiah took the paper, already knowing what it would show. A crude sketch of a young Apache girl, sharp eyes, long hair. The words, "Wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. Reward $50. Josiah looked up slowly. "Can't say I have." "You sure?" the soldier asked, leaning forward. "Small, quiet, might be hurt, might be hiding. We think she was rescued or taken by someone passing near Cottonwood Flats." Josiah held the paper a second longer, then folded it and handed it back. "Haven't seen anyone but jackrabbits and a cow that won't listen." Lieutenant Graham narrowed his eyes. "She's not just a runaway, Mr. Wyatt. She's part of a violent group. Savages. And that sign they left, they mean it." Josiah's jaw tightened. "If I see anything, I'll send word." The soldier studied him for a moment longer, then he nodded once and turned his horse. "See that you do." Josiah watched him ride off until the dust disappeared. Inside, just beyond the curtain, stood Willow. She had heard every word. She stared at him, unmoving. He stepped in, took off his hat, and leaned it against the door. "They came looking, showed me a paper, said you were wanted." She didn't speak. "I told them no." Her eyes narrowed, a mixture of confusion and suspicion in them. "I don't know what you did, Willow. And maybe someday you'll tell me. But out here, a man makes his choices. I've made mine." He turned to the stove, pretending to stir the beans he had already made. Behind him, she moved. A barely perceptible shift, a small breath, and in that moment, trust cracked the silence just a little wider. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows, and the wind had softened for a while. It had been a strange day, too quiet, as if the desert was holding its breath. Josiah sat on the porch, sharpening his knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. Each pass of steel on stone echoed faintly across the open yard. He focused on the motion more than the blade, as if the repetition might keep his thoughts from the woman sleeping inside. Or not sleeping. He paused, cocking his head. The faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. Not a coyote, not a horse. Something lighter, human. He looked up. Willow was outside. It was the first time she had stepped beyond the threshold on her own since he brought her home. Her bare feet touched the earth tentatively, as if testing if it would still hold her. The woven blanket he had left folded at the edge of her cot hung from her shoulders, trailing like a second skin. She walked slowly, her steps uneven but certain, toward the far end of the yard where the barn stood. Josiah set the knife aside. At first, he just watched, not wanting to shatter the moment. In the sunlight, she looked smaller, more fragile, and yet something in the way she moved had changed. She wasn't escaping, she was reclaiming her space. She reached the bare patch of dirt near the barn, where the wind had swept clean all debris. There she knelt carefully, as if kneeling before something sacred, and let the blanket fall to her elbows. Her fingers moved with purpose as she picked up a stick and began to draw in the dust. Only then did Josiah rise. He walked over slowly, his boots quiet on the dirt, giving her space. He stood a few feet behind her, watching her hand trace lines into the earth. In the dirt, she had drawn a bird with wings stretched wide, frozen in mid-flight. But it was encircled by flames, like a burning crown. The lines were bold and sharp, etched with tension. The bird looked alive and in agony, its wings angled upward as if trying to escape the fire or rise with it. Josiah had seen war, seen symbols carved into rifles and burned into skin. But this was something older, a cry, a prayer. He squatted beside her. His voice was low and respectful. "What is that?" Willow didn't look up. Her face remained still, her eyes focused on the drawing. For a long moment she said nothing, as if deciding whether or not to set the memory free. Then she spoke. "Bird in fire," she said, her voice dry and cracked like the riverbeds in midsummer. "My people's sign." Josiah remained silent, his eyes never leaving the image. She tapped the center of the bird with the stick. "This was my father's, our family. We painted it on teepees, carved it on bows, always flying, always fire." Josiah could feel the tension in her body, the way her shoulders were pulled back, the tightness in her jaw. She was bracing for something. "They came, soldiers, white coats, last spring, said we must move, far, dry place, no food, no water, said we were a danger." She paused, the stick in her hand trembling. "We said no, we stay, we fight." Her voice thinned. "They burned, killed, my mother, my 2 brothers, burned the old ones inside the teepee." Josiah slowly clenched his fists, his jaw tight. Something old and angry stirred in his chest. "I ran, hid. They found me, beat me, tied me, called me a thief, said I took a rifle. I didn't." Then she turned, locking eyes with him for the first time. There was fury in her voice now. "I did not steal. I did not kill. I did nothing wrong." Her voice echoed in the open air like thunder across dry land. Josiah didn't speak for a moment. Then his voice came, low but certain. "I believe you." She turned back to the dirt, dropped the stick. Her hands fell into her lap. Then her shoulders began to shake. At first she made no sound, just silent tremors, but then the sobs came, raw and unfiltered. She curled forward, arms wrapped around her knees, her hair falling like a curtain. The pain was too big for her body, and it poured out in waves. Josiah stayed beside her, unmoving. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to comfort her with empty words. Instead, he reached out and pressed his hand into the dirt beside the flaming bird, palm down, finger spread. His skin against the dust she had shaped with her grief. It was a testimony. She felt it. Eventually her breathing slowed. She lifted her head, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Their eyes met unshielded. "You can call me Willow," she whispered. Josiah gave a small nod, his voice like gravel and wind. "All right then." Willow it is." They sat together in silence as the sun slid behind the ridge and the fire drawn in the dirt faded into shadow. But its ashes, like the truth, remained. That night, the wind whistled low through the rafters, whispering through the thin walls like a ghost remembering its name. Josiah sat by the fire, boots off, shirt sleeves rolled, tending a kettle of beans. Willow stood by the window, arms folded around herself, watching the night settle over the desert. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It was something gentler now, like a shared breath. She turned suddenly. "You want to know the truth?" Josiah looked up, his spoon pausing mid-stir. He nodded once, careful not to press her with words. She walked slowly to the table, sat across from him. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "My father was a minor chief," she began. "Our band was small, peaceful. We traded with settlers, even learned their god. We had rules, boundaries. We wanted to live." Josiah listened, his face unreadable but focused. "A full winter ago," she continued, "a white woman was found dead near our hunting grounds. Her throat was cut. Her husband said it was us." Her fingers tensed around the table's edge, but it wasn't. She died because he killed her. Everyone knew, but they blamed us. Her eyes found Josiah's. "The soldiers came. Not just them, ranchers, town men with rifles and fear. They said they were taking justice." She swallowed hard, the pain rising in her throat. "They burned our camp, shot my brothers while they slept. My mother died holding the prayer beads the priest gave her. They left my father hanging from our council pole." Josiah lowered his eyes. "They found me in a hollow tree. I was hiding. I had a knife, but they took it, said I was planning revenge, said I was dangerous. They tied me, questioned me, beat me. Then they took me to that tree you found me on, hung me up like bait." "For who?" Josiah asked, his voice a low scrape. "For the rest of us, for anyone still alive and angry." She stared at him, then asked softly, "Why did you cut me down?" He looked at her for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. "Because once," he said, "I." Her brow furrowed. "My family," Josiah said, his voice flat. "Last spring, raiders hit our ranch, said they were Apache. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I was out hunting, came back to ashes. My sister was 16. I heard her crying in the barn, but I was scared. I didn't go in. I waited for help. She died before anyone came. The silence after that was different, not empty, heavy. "You saved me because you couldn't save her," Willow whispered. He nodded. She studied him. "If I had been white, would you still have pulled the knife?" Josiah stood slowly, walked around the table until he was in front of her. She looked up, searching his face. He reached down, cupped her chin gently in one hand. His fingers were calloused, but his touch was careful, measured. "I don't love skin," he said. "I love what breathes under it." Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. She reached for his hand, pressed her cheek into his palm. And then, as if by instinct, they leaned into each other. The kiss was quiet, hesitant at first, then fuller, as if both had been holding their breath for too long and finally remembered how to exhale. Her hands trembled on his chest, his arms circled her back. The fire popped softly behind them. Later, they stood in the small kitchen, candlelight flickering against old wooden beams. Their shadows moved as one on the far wall, a slow dance neither of them had ever learned but somehow knew. Outside, the desert wind calmed for the first time in days. Inside, something began to mend. The wind returned with the morning, gusting harder than usual, carrying the scent of sand and distant smoke. Josiah felt it in his bones. Something was shifting. He had lived long enough under this sky to recognize the wait before a storm, even if it came with boots instead of clouds. 3 days had passed since the kiss, since the words neither of them said aloud took root in the silence. Willow had begun to move more freely around the ranch. She helped feed the animals, swept the floor, even laughed once, softly, when Josiah cursed the stubborn mule that refused to eat. But the peace was thin. By noon, a trail of dust rose from the east. Josiah stood by the fence, jaw tight, his rifle resting against the porch. 3 riders approached. Local men in canvas coats and old hats, rifles slung across their backs. Their leader wore a tin badge on his chest that looked more self-appointed than earned. "Wyatt," the man called as he dismounted. "Heard tell you might be harboring someone who doesn't belong." Josiah kept his voice even. "You hear a lot of things, Joe. Doesn't make them true." Joe Prescott spat into the dirt. "A girl. Apache. There's a reward. $50 cash and the thanks of every God-fearing man west of the Pecos." "You came all this way for a rumor?" Prescott's eyes narrowed. "We aim to check inside just in case." Josiah stepped down from the porch slowly. "You got a warrant?" Prescott snorted. "You think this is a court, Wyatt?" The other 2 men shifted in their saddles, hands near their weapons. The air hung brittle. "I'm the only one who lives here," Josiah said, his voice calm. "Ain't no girl, just ghosts and goats." Prescott stared at him for a long moment, then gave a tight nod. "If you're lying, you'll burn with her." They rode off without checking the house, but the message was clear. They would be back, with more men and less patience. That night, Josiah sat by the fire behind the barn. The stars were hidden behind heavy clouds. In his hand was the crude wooden sign he had dug up. The words were faded now, but still readable, still hateful. "White men don't forgive." He stared at it for a long time, his fingers brushing over the letters. Then he stood and carried it to the fire pit. No ceremony, no speech. He laid it down among the kindling and struck a match. The flames rose slowly, then swallowed the words in orange and gold. The wood cracked and curled inward, as if the hate itself resisted dying. Behind him, footsteps. Willow. She wore one of his old coats, too large on her frame, the sleeves rolled up twice. She stepped beside him, her eyes on the fire. She didn't speak, but her presence said enough. The flames danced in her eyes, reflecting something that looked like mourning and something that looked like freedom. "I should have burned it sooner," Josiah said quietly. She didn't answer, but she moved closer. Close enough for her shoulder to touch his. She gripped the coat tighter around herself, her fingers knotted in the fabric. "Thank you," she said softly. The words were simple, but they landed like something sacred. He looked down at her, his heart heavy and alive at all once. The fire burned low, embers glowing. The wind slowed to a hush. And for the first time since he cut her down from that tree, there was no sign left of what had been written against her. Only heat, smoke, and the weight of what they had chosen instead. The next morning brought no wind, just a stillness, thick and unnatural. Josiah rose early, packing dried biscuits, jerky, and a canteen of water into a saddlebag. The air around the ranch felt tighter, more watched. He had seen smoke on the horizon, too steady to be a campfire. Word had spread. They were out of time. Willow stood by the fence line, her hair braided back, wrapped in the same coat she had worn by the fire. Her face was calm, but her eyes held questions. "We have to go," Josiah said, tying the final strap on his pack. "Tonight." She nodded, already knowing. "There's land south of here," he continued, "past the border. Some say the Apache still live free in the Sierra Madres, far from soldiers, far from signs." He paused. "We can make it if we ride hard." Willow stepped closer, so close he could see the soft flush on her cheeks. She reached for his hand and held it firm. He looked down at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "You'll come with me?" She pressed her forehead to his chest, her breath warm through his shirt. Then she answered in Apache, slow and careful. "I want to live. I want to live as your wife." Josiah closed his eyes. That one sentence carried more weight than 1,000 promises. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair like it was the last thing keeping him grounded. By sundown, they were ready. 2 horses saddled, the ranch left behind. No note, no fire, no goodbye. Just a quiet door left swinging, and a home turned to memory. They rode through the desert under the cover of stars, moonlight painting the ridges silver. Willow leaned forward against her horse, her movement steady, practiced. She didn't ask what lay ahead, she only followed. 10 miles from the border, the land opened into low scrub brush and stone cliffs. Josiah scanned the horizon constantly, every shadow a threat. His gut turned tight. Then the shot came. A crack echoed across the plain. Josiah jerked in the saddle, then collapsed sideways, sliding hard into the dirt. "Josiah!" Willow screamed, leaping from her horse. He clutched his side, blood already soaking through his shirt. "Keep going," he rasped. "No." Another shot whizzed past them, striking the rock behind. From the ridge line, 2 figures appeared, riders, rifles raised. Josiah groaned, pulling himself up. "We have to move." Willow hooked her arm under his shoulder, trying to lift him. "Believe me," he growled, "I won't die here." Through sheer will, they stumbled toward the nearby rocks, bullets cutting through the night. Josiah's boots dragged behind him, but he forced one step after another. Every breath came wet, his vision blurring. Somehow they reached a narrow gap between 2 cliffs, a hidden pass. Willow half dragged, half carried him inside, pressing him to the stone wall, her own chest heaving. The shots faded behind them. The riders would not follow through the rocks, not without losing speed, not without risk. In the shadow of the pass, Josiah collapsed to his knees, blood dripping onto the dust. He looked up at her, pain and wonder both in his eyes. "You said you wanted to be my wife." She knelt beside him, cupped his face. "I meant it." His lips curved even through the pain. "Then we'd better make it through this pass." She nodded, and for the first time since they met, Willow prayed, not to the gods of the settlers, but to the spirits of fire, wind, and survival. Because love in this place was always a gamble, and tonight they were betting everything. The teepee flap rustled gently in the river breeze, moonlight slipping through the stitched seams like silver threads. Outside, crickets sang low, and the water whispered over stone. Inside, propped on folded blankets, lay Josiah. His breath was slow but steady now. The fever had passed, the worst was over. Willow sat beside him, a basin of cool water at her side, gently wiping his brow. He watched her through half-lidded eyes, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Are you always this bossy with your patients?" he murmured. She raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Only the ones too stubborn to die." He chuckled, then winced as the laughter tugged at the stitches in his side. She hushed him gently, placing a palm over his chest to steady him. The silence between them deepened, not awkward, but full. Then as the wind sighed outside, he spoke again. "Tell me something true," Josiah said, his voice softer now, touched by something raw. "What's your real name?" Willow looked down, hesitating. Then she took his hand and guided it to her chest, just over her heart. "Tessanagi," she said. "It means whispering river. My father gave it to me." Josiah closed his eyes for a beat, as if letting the name settle into him like a prayer. When he opened them again, there was a warmth behind the weariness. "Tessanagi," he repeated, tasting the word. "You're the only peace I've ever known." She didn't cry this time. She only held his hand tighter. Months passed on the southern edge of the territory, where the border blurred into mesquite groves and a dry wind carried scents of sage and wood. A small lodge stood near the river's bend, made of pine and hide, strong but humble. It was surrounded by whispering reeds and wildflowers. In the shade of its awning, Tassanagi sat cross-legged, stitching a tiny white shirt. Her belly had rounded gently, visible now beneath her woven sash. Humming quietly, she worked the needle through soft cotton, her fingers sure and calm. Beyond the garden, Josiah was training a young mustang, murmuring low commands, patient and firm. Every so often he glanced back toward the lodge, catching sight of her silhouette through the light curtain, and every time he smiled. Inside, the walls bore no trophies, no portraits, just bundles of herbs, 2 books, and a child's blanket waiting to be finished. Tassanagi moved through it like the breath of the place itself, present, grounding, full of quiet life. One evening she walked down to the river, the same path she'd taken for months now. The current moved slow and certain. She stepped barefoot into the shallows, let the cool water kiss her skin, and laid both hands over her belly. "Little one, your father, he didn't just forgive. He loved, and he kept his promise, every one." Behind her, footsteps padded across the grass. Josiah came to stand beside her, their fingers intertwining without a word. Together they watched the river drift under the dusk, where stars began to blink into view. No one would have expected 2 hunted souls to find something like this, but somehow, in a world of scars and storms, they had created a quiet patch of earth where love had taken root. Not the kind written in history books, but the kind that endured. And the river kept flowing, peaceful, like her name, like their life, like something finally truly home. If this story of a broken curse and a redeemed soul found a home in your heart, then you've found your home here. Here on the Cursed Sheriff channel, we unearth the stories buried in the unforgiving dust of the West, tales of flawed heroes, impossible choices, and the brutal price of justice. Subscribe and join the posse that rides for the truth, no matter how cursed it may be.